Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor Spooner.
A lot's happened since we talked last,
Yes.
and it's not the sort of story that gives hope for the future. It makes things much more difficult to explain and to understand. Um, the biggest problem, I suppose, is Europe, since that's the largest population and the most difficult to understand because we don't really know whether the people whether the perpetrators are sent this from somewhere in the Middle East specifically for that purpose, or whether they are people that have been living there for some time
Hmm.
and are reacting against the situation there. And that, I think, is something that we need to know because my position, as you know, on these sorts of things is that it has something to do with the unevenness of different rates of social change in different parts of the world and in different communities, even in one part of the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what we don't really know is whether we're dealing now with the difference in the rate of change in Europe on the one hand and somewhere in the Middle East on the other, or between different parts of European society that have become different because of the influx of migrants and the tendency for migrants to live together
Hmm.
and develop their own sub-society within the larger society, which doesn't keep up with the rates of social change in the larger society.
Well, that in fact is precisely one of the reasons why the authorities are saying they had difficulty tracking the Belgian terrorists, who in fact had been living relatively openly in Brussels for a number of weeks, if not months, since the November Parisian terror attacks. They're incubated in these insular communities, and even some of the quotes I saw were people on the street where the police later raided the homes said that they had no knowledge that they had been living there. So I mean I mean, on the one hand, we have this greater socialization and contact that's going on, but on the other hand, people living across the street are unaware of who's living there. I mean, it's a little bit confounding.
No, I think what we have to do is try to mix things up more, make it less easy for particular parts of the society, excuse
God
me,
bless you.
to remain unconnected, disconnected from the rest of society. And that's difficult if they're speaking different languages.
It is. It is. And Belgium in particular seems to be a pretty weak link in the EU security chain, simply because
Although France has had similar problems, I think, hasn't it?
uh,
And the way they're talking about it in France seems to me to mean that they have similar concerns about what might happen in France. Isn't it? Isn't France still under a state of national emergency?
they are still under a state of national emergency, and I think they might be at a lower level of emergency than uh, a less urgent level of emergency than say Belgium is. But
Yeah.
yes, they're still at a high level. The Brussels airport, I believe, has not yet reopened.
No.
So there's massive transit issues going on
Or
as well.
or maybe it partially reopened, but not completely reopened. I'm not sure.
Well, certainly that terminal that was the scene of the detonation, the double detonation, is not open.
No.
So
But another thing that's not really been explained is why there are these problems in Belgium and France and not in Germany,
hmm.
when Germany, after all, has a very large number, possibly the largest number of immigrants, both from earlier, from the 60s, and on a continuing process, but also recent immigrants. I think Germany has received more recent immigrants than any of the
Oh
other
yes, they
countries.
have by a long shot. I'm wondering though, from in the perspective of globalization, I mean, we certainly appropriately talk about increased mobility and increased kind of interactivity on the part of the population, but there's another side to this coin, and that is that the police or the authorities are also increasing their interconnectedness. and also increasing their ability to better monitor and be aware of what's going on. And when you're dealing with a homogeneous society, for example, or say, for example, I know Germany would dispute that they're homogeneous, but compared to Belgium, they certainly are. They may have a little bit of an easier time monitoring what's going on in their country than, say, the Belgians do or the French do, with all those disparate social and cultural groups that are there. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Well, Belgium seems to have a particular problem of
Yes.
fragmentation of different institutional groups, and that this is part of our general problem that the way we institutionalize and organize doesn't change as fast as the way life on the ground changes and social change in general.
Well, that's true. And what's happening, as we've often discussed, is there's this increased fragmentation and empowerment that these fragmented groups then have, but the overall superstructure of the government does not change quickly enough. So this increasing fragmentation and increasing augmentation of the power of these groups is only going to increase and continue, I think, to lead to negative results until the overall structure can adjust.
I just had lunch with two Indians and a Pakistani, and I asked them, and they just come from India and Pakistan in order to study at the University of Pennsylvania, and I asked them what stood out for them as being the real difference between living here and living in South Asia, and they said friendship is different.
What do they mean by that?
That what people expect from you if you become friends with them here is very different from what people expect from you if you become friends in Pakistan or India.
A less onerous burden of friendship here, or
It's
more?
less close, it's less committed,
Hmm.
and I think this is a very good illustration of one particular factor in the unevenness that results from different rates of social change in different places. Certainly, I think everybody would agree that America has been changing faster and faster for longer than is the case in India and Pakistan. And India has recently perhaps begun to change faster than Pakistan,
Hmm.
but they're still basically at the same level.
Hmm.
And I've been searching for something that I could put my finger on and say, this is what the practical difference that it makes. And this is the first time that I've managed to get somebody to say something that I feel I can use and then go and ask somebody a similar question about the same thing. But I think this is exactly the problem that people coming from, say, Syria or Iraq to Europe, the sort of difficulty they have in assimilating. It's something that is so difficult to pinpoint. It's got nothing to do with benefits, nothing to do with any sort of legalities. It's a purely personal thing, the way people understand each other and what their mutual expectations are.
That's a very interesting observation because if you take it to one extreme, for example, in the United States, where people have hundreds, if not thousands, of quote unquote friends on vehicles such as Facebook,
Mm.
and compare those quote unquote friendships with the traditional friendships of, say, the 19th or 18th century, lifelong friends willing to put their lives down in place of another, that sort of thing. But yet then look at the way the society is currently structured and the kind of satisfaction remuneration that people with hundreds or thousands of friends on Facebook are getting out of those relationships because of the rate of change. I think, return that they're seeing are in many ways analogous to what people were getting several hundred years ago. So is it a bad thing or a good thing? Who can say? But it's certainly a very different thing for people coming from societies where that kind of connectivity is not present yet.
Was it E.M. Forster who said that if I ever have to choose between my country and my friend, I hope I would choose my friend?
I think it was he. Yes. Yes.
But that may be actually part of what's going on behind the scenes in the current situation.
Yes, because if you talk to people under the age of 25, they will stare at you blankly if we were having this discussion. They would say, we don't understand the difference between the next door neighbor who's my friend and so in Kansas who's my friend on Facebook. They
Yeah,
truly don't. And that's part of the upside or downside of
yeah,
this increasing globalization. Is it
yeah.
good or is it bad? I don't know.
It's like putting together your teenagers from today with teenagers from the 1950s and seeing how they understood each other, which of course we can't do.
No.
But that's basically what's going on, I think.
What are your opinions of what's going on in Washington D.C. now with the nuclear summit? All of the world leaders are there.
Well, I mean, I have no idea what anybody is saying to anybody else.
Hmm.
I think it's very interesting that we're having such a meeting. But I and I think it's very good that there should be such a meeting. However, I'm not sure whether I would approve of the American purpose, objectives for the meeting, because I don't really think that we can restrict the flow of knowledge. And so I think we need to talk more and more about these things,
Hmm.
but not with the objective of restricting information and knowledge, because I think that simply won't work.
Hmm.
It's the way the world was in the 1950s, or even to some extent up into the 70s or 80s, but the world isn't that way anymore, and there's no likelihood that a globalized world will, in fact, have any sort of institution with the ability to say that these people need that information, these people need that information.
No, I agree with that. No, no, no. And I think that really, if there's one issue that transcends this discussion, it would be perhaps nuclear armament. It would be perhaps the threat of Ebola or the threat of plague or some such thing that really can get people together into a room or into a city where they'd at least be willing to sit there and listen to one power or a group of powers dictate to them that, right, look, you can't have this particular capability. It's simply too dangerous. But you're right, it ultimately becomes a non-starter, brings us back to the Iranian situation again and some of the
And
comments
North Korea.
and North Korea. Oh, I forgot about him. Yeah. He's apparently gained 70 pounds in the last 6 months, and he's just getting ready to put the country back under its famine diet again.
Yes.
He needs a new PR agent. So,
Uh, and just to finish on a lighter note, did you see that India is beginning to ban alcohol?
I did see that.
And it's the anniversary. Well, it's a little bit beyond the anniversary of the date when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto banned alcohol in Pakistan. When I arrived in Pakistan for the umpteenth time in 1974, instead of just paying no attention to the alcohol in my case, they took away my bottle of whiskey.
Really?
But I was amused to see that the Indians and the Pakistanis that I had lunch with today thought that the American attitude towards alcohol was difficult to understand.
Really? That's very interesting.
Because of the heritage of prohibition still that restricts alcohol in a certain way on campus.
Even though they come from countries that have banned or will be banning alcohol.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
That's very interesting.
Uh, but so, I mean, here they all go out and binge drink instead. So.
Yes, yes. All right. Well, Professor, thank you very much. I look forward to talking with you again next week.
Good. See
Okay.
you then.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.